Okay, so welcome to our series with our alumni from Drake University, and where we're discussing with industry professionals on the Beyond Journalism School. So this is our Beyond SJMC Days event, and today we have Paul LeFort, who's going to be presenting on Audience is Everything. So I want to go ahead and hand it over to Paul, and I'll let you introduce yourself.
Great, glad to be with you, Lindsay. This is a fantastic opportunity to be in front of the Drake University crowd, and specifically the SJMC school. I'm a proud graduate, proud Bulldog, 1991 with a radio TV production degree, and have been working in the media industry, primarily the local media industry, for coming up on 30 years. So really glad to be with you today, and glad to share a couple of things about the work that I do and the clients that we serve, and really how data has infused all aspects of the media industry. So, Lindsay, if you can give me a thumbs up if you can see the screen.
We're good to go.
Outstanding. Outstanding. So at Nielsen, we talk about the audience being everything. And that means a lot of different things to a lot of different people, but it's kind of a unique place that Nielsen sits, is that we are a lot of things to a lot of different people, stakeholders across the media industry, whether they be advertisers, agencies, media owners, networks, radio stations, digital publishers. The Nielsen data that we've produced and we constantly produce is really the currency of that media industry. And when we say currency, that means if you think about a dollar bill being currency, that dollar bill is what allows buyers and sellers of goods and services to transact. And so we are the currency of the media industry, and ultimately providing reliable and actionable intelligence for all sectors within the industry. So here's my quick little headshot in case you didn't catch the first second of the video. My email address is there, and certainly I'm always happy to engage with people across our business, and most importantly for this audience, students who aspire to work in the media industry. So glad to be with you today. This headline is one that came up in the trades a few days ago, and it really struck me as pretty relevant for this audience, because of all the things that I learned during my time at the journalism school at Drake, storytelling was at the core, right? And it doesn't matter the medium, it doesn't matter the platform that you use for that storytelling, but being able to create a compelling narrative to tell a story is so essential. And so in the work that I do, I'm not writing stories, I'm not writing video packages, I'm not creating web content or podcasts, but I do use data to craft storytelling. And over the last 30 years, data has always been an important part of the media industry. But today, with all of the different platforms, all of the different metrics that exist, whether it's likes or shares or engagement, all of those things are at the core of the media industry. And so as I've learned through my career, being able to use that data, whatever data is at hand, to craft a narrative, craft a story, is essential to get across your point, whatever that may be, and to really frame a conversation or a dialogue using data at its center. So it's a really great article. It's a couple of good quotes there. And data can be your best weapon in your arsenal if you embrace it and use it in the right way, removing all conflict and setting you up to be your own data-driven storyteller. Some really good quotes in that article, but we'll move forward to the rest of the agenda, and a few headlines. We'll talk about the media landscape as Nielsen sees it. We'll talk about our core audience measurement, kind of what we do and what we collect. The diversity, equity, and inclusion conversation has always been important, but it's even more important now as it relates to careers at Nielsen, the talent that we bring at Nielsen, but also the measurements that we have in the marketplace. And we have a great deal of experience making sure that all constituents and stakeholders are represented in our measurement. So what do we mean when we say audience is everything? Well, as it relates to video and audio across all kinds of different devices, Nielsen really measures it all, right? So there's some names of some popular brands out here, whether it's the audio business and the iHeart radio stations in Des Moines. You've got obviously local broadcast affiliates of the big networks and the smaller networks. You've got cable networks like CNN and ESPN, syndication shows like Jeopardy, Dr. Phil, and Ellen. And of course, all of the FANG companies, as we like to call them, Facebook, Amazon, Netflix, Google, we measure all of them. And these are all clients of ours, right? There is some piece of Nielsen data that is central to their business and their operation, whether it's on the content production side or it's on the advertising side. And what we find in measuring all of these things is that nearly 100 years ago, Arthur Nielsen Sr. invented the concept of market share. And if you think about market share, it's what we all talk about. It doesn't matter what the business is. Your share of the existing market, whether it's fast food buyers or car sales, that idea of market share is central, and it goes back to what Arthur Nielsen created nearly 100 years ago. And so what we measure when we measure this entire ecosystem, all these different media properties, it lets them understand not just their audience, but where they sit competitively with their competing networks, competing radio stations or TV stations. So there's the graphic representation of all the logos, many more. You'll see some of the agencies down there at the bottom who obviously use our data to transact the buying and selling of ad time. You've got clients up here in the upper left like Nexstar and Sinclair. Out at the right, you've got Tegna and the Cox Media Group. Many of these companies operate television stations in Des Moines. The WHO NBC affiliate is obviously a Nexstar television station. You've got Tegna over at WOI. And you've got the market leader in many cases, KCCI, the CBS affiliate that is owned by the Hearst Corporation. If you don't know William Randolph Hearst, look him up. Fascinating figure, and his name is still attached to a TV station in Des Moines, Iowa. So fascinating recent documentary on PBS. We'll talk about that later. But all right, so to look at some data, there are basically only two things that Nielsen measures, two things that we've always measured, and two things that will be important in the media ecosystem forever. And they are how many people are tuning in, how many people are listening, how many people are watching, and how much time do they spend. Those two metrics drive every single data point at Nielsen and frankly for any media company. What's my reach and how much time do people spend with me? So this particular view, it goes back to the Q4 of 2020, which was a very different place than Q4 of 2019. But this breakdown across live television, time-shifted television, radio, game consoles, internet, certainly internet connected devices. It's a very broad view because we measure all of these different elements. And if you look at that blue bar on the left there, that blue bar is where I sit, that live television bar, and the next blue bar, which is time-shifted TV. Time-shifted TV basically means anything coming off of a DVR or a streaming service that is not live. Think about it that way. And it's still a big chunk of the audience when you look at the amount of time people spend with live television. But it's gone down a little bit over the last few years. And conversely, when you look at the streaming components to this, you'll see those going up a little bit over the last few years, specifically that dark green bar that went from 30 to 40 to 52. There's a lot of streaming that happens in that internet connected device category. But people are oftentimes surprised to learn that people still watch a lot of live television, news, sports. Right now, the fall of 2021, you've got a football season that's roaring back to life after somewhat of a less than exciting football season last year. That's driving a lot of viewership. You've got a new fall season that's back in full flight. People watch a ton of broadcast television, and it's always interesting to have folks say, well, I don't really watch TV anymore. And then you ask them, oh, but did you see the Cy-Hawk game a couple of weeks ago? Did you watch any of the Major League Baseball playoffs? And of course, the answer is yes. And then when you ask them what the weather is, oftentimes they get that from their local news station. So broadcast television is alive and healthy, but the environment is shifting. And that's certainly what we're seeing with a lot of our clients right now. And what makes it so fun to be in this business right now is because there is so much disruption. There is so much change, a lot of it accelerated by what's happened over the last year with COVID-19. So this is another little flavor of this colorful bar chart. But what you've got down at the bottom in this case are the demographics, right? So young versus old. If you look out to the right part, that adult 65 plus bar, comparing Q4 of 19 to Q4 of 2020, you see that big blue bar actually got bigger over that time. So a lot of live television still being consumed with older adults. You look down at the younger end of the spectrum, where a lot of our college students happen to sit between 18 and 34 years old. It's a lot more evenly distributed, right? And frankly, the opposite end of the spectrum, when you talk about apps on a smartphone or apps on a tablet, those yellow and orange and red parts, those are a much bigger chunk of how and what devices you use to consume your content. So it differs dramatically, but again, there's a lot of variation across the age groups. And as people move older, their consumption patterns change. Interesting trends to look at it over time and also with those demographics. So this particular slide is a very recent piece of data that we've begun publishing. You can see on the top, we've done this monthly for the past handful of months. This is a very fresh chart as of September of 21. And what's changed over time, just this year, is that you see seasonality, right? What people were watching in May is different than July, is different than in the fall when people are back to school, back to work in many cases. And you've got a ton of new content coming to television, right? Football season is always a high viewing period. And the new fall network season, lots of new shows debuting. That has contributed to a rise in the amount of time that people are spending with broadcast. And streaming, you'll notice that being about 28%, still a big chunk. And you see on the right-hand side where we break it out across all of these different providers. So Netflix and YouTube and Hulu, you go back a year and a half of those streaming partners weren't even on the stage, right? They had just launched. Disney Plus, Prime Video has been around, but it's grown. Hulu has expanded, no doubt. So that streaming chunk of time is increasingly fragmented, right? You got more and more different players that are carving up that streaming space, which means that Netflix's market share has gone down. We've seen that trend over time. They used to be the most dominant platform, and they still do a significant amount of audience, but it's gotten the slice of the pie. It continues to get smaller as more entrants come in. Okay, so the place where I live, the place that I really am always intrigued by is the local television business. So this particular snapshot is about San Diego, California. And we published these during the fall of last year when the election was, in full force, lots of attention being paid. And so understanding not just the viewing habits, but the voting behaviors of those local audiences tell those political advertisers, whether it's for a candidate or a ballot measure or a proposition, where they can best reach not just their core voters, but their influenceable voters, right? Those that can swing one way or the other. And so this kind of intelligence marrying not just what people are watching or listening to, but also their consumer behavior, their voting preferences, all of those things are incredibly important. And local television has such an important role to play in terms of the trust and the amount of time that people spend with media. Local television always resonates with local audiences. And there's always something unique, whether it's San Diego or Des Moines or Peoria or St. Louis. All of these local cities around the country have very different behaviors. So this particular map, we call our local markets DMAs, designated market areas. And you'll see Des Moines, Iowa there in the middle. But it's a collection of counties that we define as a market, right? But we measured more than 200 of them across the U.S. Every single day, every single week, month, year. And so we're constantly getting a flow of data. And you can imagine the difference between Fort Myers, Florida, and Spokane, Washington. There are very different behaviors from these places, right? And in the heartland, even if you look at Des Moines versus St. Louis versus Wichita, there are very different behaviors that exist in these local markets. And so it's always fed my intellectual curiosity to understand what makes this market unique. And every time you go there, you learn something about the people that live there. And one thing I've learned is that everybody thinks they have the most unique weather. I'm sure that's true, right? On any given day, I'm sure it's true. But there are many other differences beyond these markets, beyond just the weather. So how do we do this? How do we collect this information? Depending on the market size, there's a lot of different methods that we use, technologies that we use. In the largest markets, it's something called a local people meter, which literally sits inside the household on every TV set and measures who's in front of the set and what they're watching at any given time. The set meters themselves measure what's happening on the television set. It doesn't have the person's component, but it does measure in detail what's happening on all of those TV sets within a household. Code readers exist in kind of the middle-sized markets. It's a very passive technology. It sits next to the television, listens to the audio codes that come through the speakers and through the audio. And then the RPD Plus, the return path data, this is a combination of a few different data sets from big providers like Mediacom or Time Warner or Charter or Spectrum or Comcast, those big cable providers, Dish TV, DirecTV, the satellite providers. We harvest their set-top box data and integrate it into our local measurement. There's a lot of benefits to doing that when it is married with the panels that we create using the metering technology above. So we talked a little bit about the use of the people meters being a representative sample of homes across all DMAs, right? So we're not measuring all 300,000 households in Des Moines. We're creating a sample that is representative of the folks in Polk County and the folks in adjacent counties and the folks in West Des Moines and downtown and all over the DMA. And it's representative not just in terms of geography, but in terms of age, in terms of gender, in terms of ethnicity, in terms of language spoken. And we're representative on those measures because they all influence the viewing behavior of those households. If you have kids, you have very different television consumption than if you do not have kids, right?
Yes.
Case in point. We can all agree on that. Subscription video on demand, the Netflix, Amazon, Disney Plus, and so forth. We include out-of-home viewing. There are more screens in airports and restaurants and health clubs. We measure all of that viewing as well. And we're on this journey toward total content and total ad ratings, combining all of these different assets that broadcasters have into a single reportable metric that lets them understand their total audience, both from a programming perspective as well as an advertising perspective. So flip this around over to the radio side of things, and this map has a few different colors on it, but you can see there's over 260 radio metros that we cover. The geographies are a little bit different in radio than television. They're typically a little bit smaller. The radio station signals don't travel quite as far as the TV signals go. But again, whatever radio station you would work at, whether it's the Des Moines Radio Group or iHeartMedia, many of other companies, there are radio stations all across the U.S., over 11,000 of them, and we measure nearly every one of them. So it's a critical part of their business and certainly how we serve those communities. The methodologies on the audio side differ a little bit. We've got another version of a people meter that happens to be passive, and it's a device that people carry with them. It's basically like a Fitbit. It listens for audio codes coming through that radio station, whether you're at home or predominantly in the car when you're on the move, and lets us know what radio station is being played at any given time. The diary is featured down there in the lower right-hand corner. It is a paper and pencil diary that has been trusted, true, and tried for a long time to measure radio listening across the country. And audio is certainly more than radio. Podcasting is increasingly important. We've seen an explosion in the number of podcasts over the last several years. And those radio broadcasters are extending their brands onto new platforms like podcasting, which of course is measured as well. And radio is a reach medium. Almost 270 million consumers reached each week by radio. It's a very similar number for television, but that's the power of broadcasting, of local media, is its ability to attract large-scaled audiences that advertisers are often looking for. So a couple of slides to bring us home. The Nielsen company has been around for nearly 100 years. We have continued to grow and innovate and invest and service our clients in these areas. And we are always looking for curious, talented, ambitious folks to join our team. And the Nielsen careers page is obviously a great entry point in terms of learning more about those careers. But just a word on diversity and inclusion from our CEO. When we operate in a culture that is diverse and inclusive, innovation flourishes. Our clients win and our employees are engaged and collaborate to bring the best that Nielsen can offer to the communities that we serve. At the end of the day, fostering diversity and inclusion isn't just a good thing to do, it's crucial to the success of our business and all businesses. And I think that's such a powerful phrase because it's important that we understand the power of diversity in our larger society. Nielsen is a for-profit company, and we know that having diversity amongst our teams and our people and our associates helps our business be more successful. So it really is a very virtuous circle that diversity, equity, and inclusion can play in terms of the business environment. Sandra Sims-Williams is our Chief Diversity Officer. She has some great quote here. When you come to work, you're part of a workplace where people feel that they matter and that they have opportunities to grow with us, and where they have a safe space to be themselves. We talk a lot about that at Nielsen, and I'm proud to work for a company for nearly 20 years that values these things. And I've seen how they positively impact individuals in terms of their careers, their growth and development, and also the difference that they make in serving our customers and our clients. So there's a few things on this page. I'll just highlight a few in terms of our talent. We've got leadership development programs, mentoring programs. I was mentoring a young man from India this past year. Really captivating guy, fantastic person to connect with. Time zones are a little tough working with India, but it was a pleasure getting up at 6 a.m. to talk with him because he's a really engaging and inspiring guy. Employee resource groups, we've got amazing employee resource groups across the spectrum of diversity. And what I find is that when you engage with any one of them, the things that they talk about, whether it's women or disabled or military veterans or certainly Hispanic, African American, Latino, they talk about so many of the same things, right? Because they matter to everybody, whether it's growth and motivation and aspirations. They're really very resourceful groups. And certainly the accountability. We issue reports every year in terms of how we are doing against very specific metrics around diversity, equity, and inclusion. And we do that not because it's required of us by the SEC or regulators, but because we believe it's important for our stakeholders to understand, are we achieving our targets? Are we meeting the goals that we've set for ourselves on some very important metrics? So a couple of words about the kinds of folks that we're looking for. We're a data company, no question about it. And so the analytics and the intellect and curiosity as it relates to data, certainly that's at the core of what we do. But communication skills and leadership and being a digital native, all of these things matter as well. And while data and analytics wasn't part of my training at Drake, the education that I got at Drake taught me the ability to be curious and learn about all of these other things that are so instrumental to the local media business. So one final quote from our founder a long, long time ago. He said, "The price of light is less than the cost of darkness." And it's such a perfect quote because it's not cheap to have knowledge, to have light, to have transparency, but it's way less expensive than being in the dark. Such a powerful quote, and it continues nearly 100 years to drive our company forward. So I think that's about the last slide, Lindsay. I'll come off the screen share, but hopefully that is meaningful to the group.
Wonderful. Perfect. That was a beautiful presentation, Paul. Thank you so much for your efforts and your times in preparing that and educating our students on some of the things that you're doing and how your work is so important, and especially that work in engaging diversity audiences and whatnot. It's so valuable for our students to be hearing from industry professionals and leaders in our industry. So before we wrap up today, we did want to have the opportunity to ask a few questions. And so due to my natural curiosity, I want to learn just a little bit about Paul LeFort and those experiences. You talked a little bit about Drake University and your experiences that you learned here. What, if you could say that you were starting out in college today in this era, what are some pieces of advice that you might give Paul LeFort starting his first or second year at Drake University studying journalism and mass communication?
Oh man, that's a great question, Lindsay. This is the best part of the presentation is the back and forth for sure. You know, I think some things I did correctly at Drake. I had a great mentor. I had a great professor in Todd Evans. You know, that relationship has spanned 30 plus years, and I'm so thankful that I had that throughout my career. Having a mentor, and a mentor doesn't have to be a professor or an advisor. It can be an upperclassman. You know, it can be a coach. It can be you know, a student you're working with, a partner that you're working with. Mentorship takes a lot. Yeah, or an industry professional, exactly. So having a mentor, I think, is critical. And you know, as much as I did at Drake, and I did a fair amount, but looking back on that, I left a lot of gas in the tank, right? I mean, I could have done so much more because there was so much going on around me. And now, you know, students at Drake talk about being Drake busy, which I think is a great way to think about it. You don't have to be Drake busy. You have to do as much as you're comfortable with, but take advantage of all the opportunities around you. And certainly the projects, the clubs, the associations, getting involved with whatever excites you or you're passionate about. I'm so thankful to be associated with a university that has as many opportunities for kids of all shapes and sizes to get engaged. And I could have been more engaged when I was my first or second year, no doubt about it. So there's always room to go there. And I think the last part of it, you know, the internships are so central to the journalism school. They always have been. It gave me such a great jumping off point in the local radio business back in the day. I think my first job at KRNT, KRNQ, now part of the Des Moines Radio Group. They brought me in as the intern. They said, "Here's 800, you know, vinyl albums. We want you to alphabetize them, right?" And and lo and behold, you know, vinyl went away, and now it's coming back, right? So even alphabetizing the vinyl collection, it was basically to make sure I was going to show up on the second day and not walk out the door. But it was a great jumping off point. And those internships, I worked for a record label in London for a semester because I went overseas. Boy, was that cool. You know, just those opportunities. And now you've got J terms, which even if you can't go away for a whole semester, you can go away for 3 weeks and get a whole different perspective on the world. So I could go on about the things that I would advise young folks to do, but those are a few of the top ones.
That, I have to say, that's my number one regret for my undergrad experience, is not studying abroad. And so I am so jealous of all of our students and those J-term opportunities, because I'm like, pack me in your luggage, right? Take me along with you. I want an opportunity to experience one of those.
Yeah, even a bite-sized form for 3 weeks at a J-term, it's still meaningful for sure.
Exactly. And we both know now as adults, those experiences just don't come by as often, right? The opportunity to spend 3 weeks away or a semester away or whatever it happens to be, you can't do it again as a grown adult. So
it's a lot harder once you're out of college, no doubt.
Exactly. So I think it's really important what you just shared there, that really taking advantage of those experiences while you're at the university and while you're here at Drake. So I really appreciate you saying that. So tell us a little bit more about, or tell me a little bit more and share with the audience a little bit more about the path that brought you to Nielsen. How did you end up at Nielsen? And I know I like to stump the interview.
Yeah, you know, so let's see if I can nail it down to like maybe a couple of points here. So because the thing that was really formative in terms of what I wanted to study at Drake was the election of 1992, the presidential election, right? So this is Michael Dukakis and the first Bush, right? Goes all the way. But seeing those satellite trucks and all the media and everything else, that was really cool to me. So, okay, so I started exploring the media thing. And the local radio job that I had coming straight out of college was terrific. I got to work at a radio station. It's remotes and it's on-air personalities and it's running the board and all of that stuff. It was fantastic. What I quickly learned is that, on the talent side of things, Howard Stern, Rush Limbaugh, when you get to be those folks, rest in peace, Rush Limbaugh, but you're going to bounce around to a lot of different markets and a lot of different places. And I wasn't so interested in moving constantly to jump up market ranks. And so I went to the business side of things, which is ad sales and advertising, and data is so central to that. I saw a couple of presentations from, at the time, our Arbitron representative at the radio station. And he was talking about how this market's different than that market. And I'm like, well, wouldn't it be cool to understand what's different between all of the markets? And the ability to weave a narrative and to see things in data that could make an impact in terms of that programming choice or that personality or that story to cover, or what you might charge for a 30-second spot. That led me down the business side and the data analytics side. And boy, there's a lot of companies that do market research, but none of them have the scale and the breadth and kind of the nexus where Nielsen sits between all of these different stakeholders in the media business. And so it took me a couple of years. I was, pitching jobs for a couple of years before I found the right one that was really a good fit with my passions and my skills. And fortunately, Nielsen has been a really great place for the past couple of decades.
Yeah, well, it's obviously been a great area for you, and it's the presentations and your dynamic ability to present obviously bode well for you as well. So last question, and then we'll be finished and we'll wrap up this series, this part of the series today, is that I just wanted to ask you a little bit more specifically about students entering the internship and job market right now. Are there any pieces of advice or elements that you're seeing that we're missing, or that students should be mindful of, or even those of us in professional and career services that we can be advising students? What little tidbits would you be willing to share with us?
Well, I think the basic fundamentals of being able to, present yourself well and communicate well. I mean, that's what the journalism school is so great at teaching anybody. Those things remain as true as ever. Having a buttoned up resume and getting, frankly, a lot of different people to look at that resume and sharpen it to make it as good as possible representation of what you've done and who you are and what your aspirations happen to be. Those things are still fundamental. The thing that there's no substitute for networking, and it's especially true in the media business, right? If I go back to May of 2020, when COVID was, right into the ditch, I had so many Drake students reaching out to me, just graduated. They were heading into this job market where it was complete unknown, right? But those kids were reaching out on LinkedIn and setting up, informational interviews and just conversations. And it was inspiring to me to watch kids, even in the face of a pandemic, trying to make connections and figure out where they were headed, right? This thing dropped out over here, but I'm working on something else over here. And whatever advice or suggestions I could make to them. And then you fast forward a year to May of 2021, this job market now is white hot and has been white hot. It's like nothing I've seen in my career. So for folks that are out there looking for jobs or trying to find that, you'll find it. The right fit is out there. I have no doubt about it. But the persistence and the grit and understanding that even in a white hot job market, you may get 10, 20, 50 rejections before you get the job. That's okay. That's part of the deal. And the persistence and the grit and the resilience that I think Drake instills in so many of its students serves them well in the long run. So all those folks that I was talking to last year that were really struggling, they've all found jobs and are doing quite well, which is a great thing to be able to report. And one last thing, Lindsay, I'll before you share, I carry this around with me everywhere I go.
I love it.
I really do. It's central to what I do, but it's also central to our democracy. It's like information and news and being connected to your communities. It's so important for our country, and certainly I'm lucky that I get to work in a space that's as dynamic as this. Thank you for the time today.
Thank you so much, Paul. Paul is a member of our National Advisory Council. He is willing to network and meet with young students, and he is just a phenomenal resource. And we cannot thank you enough at the School of Journalism and Mass Communication here at Drake for all you do for our school and particularly for our students. We are so proud to have you as a member of the Bulldog family, and we can't thank you enough for everything you do for us, Paul.
Go Bulldogs. Happy to
do
it.
Go Bulldogs.
Thank you.